There are thousands of miles of old railway tunnels crisscrossing this country. Some were sealed with concrete when the lines were rerouted. Some were simply abandoned, left to the dark and the damp. Track inspectors still walk these routes, checking for collapses, for trespassers, for anything unusual. And sometimes they find things on the rails that shouldn't be there. Welcome to True Terror Files Official. Railway work is lonely by design. You walk the tracks for miles with nothing but the crunch of ballast under your boots and the distant sound of a river or the wind through the trees. The old tunnels are the worst. They swallow sound. They swallow light. And they hold on to the cold like a tomb. Most track walkers have stories, strange echoes, unexplained lights, the feeling of being watched from the portal as they emerge. But a few have stories that go beyond the usual. Stories that made them request a transfer to a sunny yard job where the only thing to worry about is a switching error. Tonight, 3 people who worked the abandoned lines shared the moments the tracks took them somewhere they never wanted to go. A rail inspector in Colorado who found a light in a tunnel that had been sealed for decades. A maintenance worker in West Virginia who descended into a basement that wasn't on any blueprint. And a night security guard at a decommissioned station who discovered that some platforms still see passengers. Let's walk the line. Rhea Lindstrom had been a track inspector for the Colorado Southern Line for 11 years, and she'd walked every mile of the old narrow gauge route at least 100 times. Our job was to check for rock falls, washouts, and rail wear on the section that ran through the San Juan Mountains, including the infamous spiral tunnel, a corkscrew of a passage built in 1904 to gain elevation inside the mountain, abandoned in 1968 when the new alignment bypassed it entirely. The tunnel had been sealed with a concrete bulkhead and a steel grate. But weather and time had cracked the seal, and Rhea's supervisor wanted an assessment before they spent the money to seal it again properly. She parked her truck at the end of a Forest Service road and hiked the last half-mile to the lower portal. The concrete bulkhead was still there, but a corner had crumbled away, leaving a gap just large enough for a person to squeeze through if they were determined. Rhea clicked on her headlamp, grabbed her handheld spotlight, and slipped inside. The tunnel was exactly what she expected: wet, cold, smelling of old creosote and mineral seep. The rails were still in place, rusted but intact, curving gently to the left as they began the spiral ascent inside the mountain. She walked slowly, her light sweeping the walls. Old soot stains from decades of steam locomotives, graffiti from the 1970s, faded and illegible. The occasional glint of a discarded spike. Then, about 600 feet in, her beam caught something on the tracks ahead. A headlamp. Not an old miner's carbide lamp, a modern LED headlamp. It's black and orange, sitting upright on the rail as if someone had placed it there carefully, and it was turned on. The beam pointed directly at her. Rhea stopped. Her own headlamp illuminated the scene. There were no footprints in the dust on the ties. No sign of how the headlamp had gotten there. She walked toward it slowly, her boots crunching on the ballast. She reached down to pick it up, and that's when she heard the sound behind her. A train whistle. Not the modern horn of a diesel, a high, mournful steam whistle, echoing up the spiral from deeper in the mountain. Rhea's blood went cold. There were no trains on this line. The rails had been severed at both portals. There was no power, no locomotives, nothing but rust and silence. But the whistle came again, louder this time, closer, and then she heard the chuff. The unmistakable rhythm of a steam locomotive climbing the grade. Shoot UFF, dash shoot UFF, dash shoot UFF. Rhea grabbed the headlamp from the rail and turned to run back toward the portal. Her own light caught the wall of the tunnel, and she saw something that made her freeze. The soot stains were moving, swirling, forming shapes, faces. Dozens of faces pressed into the brick, mouths open in silent screams, and from the darkness behind her, the chuffing grew louder. She could feel the vibration in the rails now. Something was coming up the spiral. Rhea ran. She ran toward the gray light of the portal, her boots slipping on the wet ties, the stolen headlamp still clutched in her hand. She squeezed through the gap in the concrete, scraping her shoulders, and burst out into the daylight. She didn't stop running until she reached her truck. She sat in the cab, gasping, and looked at the headlamp she'd taken from the tunnel. It was still on. The battery indicator showed full charge. There was a name written in Sharpie on the band, M. Kovac. Rhea drove straight to the division office and filed her report. She recommended immediate permanent sealing of the spiral tunnel with reinforced concrete and steel rebar. She didn't mention the whistle. She didn't mention the faces. He didn't mention the headlamp she'd thrown into a dumpster behind the office. But a week later, she looked up the name Kovac in the company archives. Michael Kovac was a track walker who'd gone missing in 1963. His body was never found. The last entry in his logbook, dated November 14th, said he was going to check a report of a strange light in the spiral tunnel. He never clocked out. Rhea still walks the tracks for Colorado Southern, but she never goes near the old narrow gauge line. And sometimes, when she's alone on a quiet stretch of rail, she hears a faint whistle in the distance, and she walks a little faster. Dante Okonkwo was a third-generation rail worker, but he'd never worked in a roundhouse. When the West Virginia Railway Museum hired him to help with the restoration of the old Harkins Roundhouse, a massive brick structure built in 1912 to service steam locomotives, he figured it would be a straightforward job. Clean out the debris, assess the structure, document everything. The roundhouse had been abandoned since 1959, when the railroad switched to diesels and left the steam facilities to rot. The main floor was a cathedral of rust and broken glass, the turntable in the center frozen in place, the individual bays radiating outward like spokes on a wheel. But it was the basement that interested the museum. Old blueprints showed a sublevel with a massive coal-fired boiler that had provided steam heat to the entire complex. Dante's job was to find the access stairs and see if the boiler was salvageable. He found the stairwell behind a collapsed workbench in Bay 7. The stairs were concrete, slick with black mold, descending into a darkness that smelled of wet ash and iron. He clicked on his flashlight and started down. The basement was larger than he expected. The boiler dominated the center of the spacer-rusted behemoth of riveted steel plates, cold and silent. Pipes radiated from it like arteries, disappearing into the ceiling. Dante walked around it, taking photos, noting the condition. That's when he saw the door. A heavy steel door set into the far wall, painted industrial green with a faded sign. Ash pit access, authorized personnel only. It wasn't on the blueprints. Dante was curious, pulled the door open. It swung easily, silently on well-oiled hinges. Beyond it was a narrow tunnel, barely 4 feet high, lined with fire brick. The air that came out was hot, but not warm hot, like a furnace was still burning somewhere down there. Dante crouched and entered the tunnel. It sloped downward, the brick walls closing in, the heat intensifying with every step. His flashlight caught something on the floor, a set of footprints in the ash. Bare footprints. Human. Small. Like a child's. He followed them deeper. The tunnel opened into a small chamber. In the center of the chamber was a furnace door, cast iron glowing a dull red. The footprints led directly to it and stopped. Dante stared at the furnace door. The heat was oppressive now, sweat running down his face. He reached out to touch the iron handle. It was cool. He pulled the door open. Inside the furnace was a figure, small, hunched, the size of a child. It was made of ash and coal and something else, something that glowed with its own internal heat. Its eyes were two burning coals. Its mouth opened, and a voice like crackling flames spoke. They told us to keep the fires burning. We're still keeping them. Do you need steam? Dante slammed the furnace door shut and scrambled backward through the tunnel, his head scraping the low ceiling. He could hear the furnace door opening again behind him, and the sound of something small and hot crawling after him on hands and knees. He burst out of the green door and threw his weight against it, slamming it shut. The heat vanished. The door was cold, backed away, his flashlight shaking. He climbed the stairs 2 at a time and didn't stop until he was outside in the gray daylight. Dante quit the restoration project that afternoon, told the museum director that the basement was unstable and the boiler was a total loss. He didn't tell her about the ash pit access. He didn't tell her about the child made of coal. But he researched the Harkins Roundhouse later that year. In the winter of 1923, a fire had broken out in the basement. The Roundhouse employed boys as young as 10 to rake ash from the boilers. 2 of them were trapped in the ash pit tunnel when the fire spread. Their bodies were never recovered. The railroad sealed the access door and struck it from all records. Dante works a desk job for Amtrak now, far from any roundhouses. But sometimes when his office heater kicks on in the winter, he smells coal smoke. And he remembers the voice in the furnace asking if he needed steam. Mina Voss had worked night security at the decommissioned Grand Street Terminal for 2 years, and she'd never seen anything she couldn't explain. The terminal had been closed to passenger service in 1981, converted to a maintenance yard and storage facility for out-of-service rolling stock. Mina's job was simple: walk the perimeter, check the locks on the old passenger areas, and make sure no one was camping in the abandoned waiting rooms. The terminal was a maze of marble hallways, rusted tracks, and platforms that hadn't seen a paying customer in 40 years. On a humid August night, Mina was making her 2 a.m. round through the lower level of secondary platform that had been used for local service, now sealed behind a chain-link gate. She'd checked this platform 100 times. It was always empty, always silent. Tonight, when she aimed her flashlight through the gate, she saw a woman standing at the edge of the platform, dressed in old-fashioned traveling clothes, a long coat, a clogie hat, leather gloves. She was holding a small suitcase. She was looking down the dark tunnel as if waiting for a train. Mina's heart lurched. "Ma'am, you can't be down here. This area is closed." The woman didn't turn around. She just lifted one gloved hand and pointed down the tunnel. Mina fumbled with her keys and unlocked the gate. She stepped onto the platform, her flashlight beam fixed on the woman. "Ma'am, I need you to come with me. This is a restricted area." The woman slowly turned her head. Her face was pale, her eyes dark hollows, her lips were cracked and dry. When she spoke, her voice was a whisper, like wind through a cracked window. "Is this the train for Grand Central? I've been waiting so long." Mina took a step back. "There are no trains from this platform. It's been closed for 40 years. The woman's expression didn't change. "But I can hear it, can't you?" "It's coming," Mina listened at first. Nothing. Then she heard it. a low rumble. The distant screech of steel wheels on steel rails. A train. Coming from the dark tunnel, her flashlight swept the tracks. The rails were rusted, the third rail long dead. There was no power to this line. There were no trains. But the rumble grew louder. The platform began to vibrate. The woman smiled. A wide, terrible smile that showed too many teeth. Finally, Mina ran. She ran through the gate, slammed it shut, and didn't look back. She could hear the train pulling into the station behind her, the hiss of brakes, the squeal of wheels, the pneumatic sigh of doors opening, and then the woman's voice, echoing in the empty terminal. "Thank you for waiting with me." Mina burst out of the lower level and into the main concourse. The sound stopped. Silence. She stood there, gasping, her flashlight beam shaking. She finished her shift in the security office with the doors locked and the lights on. At dawn, she went back to the lower level. The gate was still locked. The platform was empty. But on the edge, right where the woman had been standing, was a small suitcase. Old leather, cracked with age. Mina never opened it. She quit the next day and took a job at a shopping mall in the suburbs. But she still thinks about the woman on the platform, the train that pulled into a dead station. And what would have happened if she'd stayed to see who got off? 3 rail workers, 3 old lines, and 3 encounters that prove some tracks lead to places the timetables don't show. Rhea Lindstrom found a headlamp in a sealed tunnel and heard a train that had been silent for 60 years. Dante Okonkwo discovered a furnace in a forgotten basement that was still being tended by hands that should have turned to ash long ago. And Mina Voss met a passenger still waiting on a platform where no train should ever arrive again. The old railways are still out there, miles of rusted track, forgotten tunnels, stations sealed and left to the dark. But the next time you're near an abandoned line and you hear a whistle where no train should be, maybe don't go looking for the source. This has been True Terror Files Official. If you've worked the rails or explored an old line and seen something you can't explain, drop it in the comments. Like, subscribe, ring that bell. And if you ever find yourself on a platform waiting for a train that never comes, just hope you're not waiting as long as some.